All right. Hello. Welcome back to another Classic Comics live stream where I look at one of the episodes of the original Star Trek series. This day, we're taking a look at episode 62 in production order. And I am going in production order, not order of broadcast. And this episode is there in truth no beauty? This one is, it's a solid episode. I don't think it's probably going to make anybody's, list of favorites, but it's definitely an improvement over the last couple of episodes, which have been, yeah, not pretty good. We've had, because I don't think we've ever really had like two really bad episodes back to back before, but that double whammy of, and the children shall lead in Spock's brain. Those are both pretty bad. Okay, so we got a couple of folks here. Hello to Rogues1138. Hello, sir. Good to see you. Thank you for showing up. Okay. And as always, I'll be reading from Mark Cushman's book. These are the voyages for behind the scenes information. So this is from an NBC press release, September 17th, 1968. Mr. Spock, after gazing upon a Medeusan, will die of madness unless Captain Kirk can persuade a woman already jealous of Spock's mental powers to save him by performing a dangerous mind link on Star Trek, October 18th. In the episode, Is There in Truth No Beauty? Diana Muldaur guest stars as Miranda, a woman resentful of Spock's ability to mentally communicate with the Medeusan, the side of which drives humans insane, and Dave Frankham as Marvick, her jealous suitor. The crisis begins when the Enterprise takes on board three passengers. Dr. Miranda Jones is determined to see beyond the ugliness that drives others mad. Her companion is the Medeusan Ambassador Kolos. If successful in establishing a mind link with Kolos, Jones can bring to the Federation the knowledge of the Medeusans, including their advanced abilities in space navigation. But Larry Marvick, the third passenger and one of the designers of the Enterprise, is obsessed with Jones and driven by jealousy. He attempts to kill Kolos. After gazing upon the Medusan, Marvick goes mad and pilots the Enterprise into hyperspace, where all are lost in a strange void. In order to get the ship home, Spock attempts the dangerous mind link with Kolos. The story's theme involves perhaps the greatest of human prejudice, beauty versus ugliness. The message is in plain sight in the title. So, Is There in Truth No Beauty may not make many top 10 lists, but is nonetheless an excellent entry in the original series. The characters are well drawn, the conflicts rich, the personal risks immense, the action intriguing and surprising. Beauty begins with a leisurely pace that shies away from the regulars, focusing instead on the backstory of the three passengers traveling aboard the Enterprise. However, once all the exposition is out of the way, the story elements and diverse characters combine together to make for a highly entertaining and purposeful drama. One might think Gene Kuhn had a hand in the script. There's warmth in the subtle humor between the characters. Proving that writer and producer were aware of the translation of Uhura's name, uh, Spock mentions that her name means freedom. Later, the other element this episode so effectively presents profound recognition of the human experience. Spock, who is inhabited by Kolos, observes this thing you call language, most remarkable. You depend on it for so very much, but is any one of you really its master? But most of all, the aloneness. You are all so alone. You live out your lives in this shell, this self contained separate space. How lonely you all are, how terribly lonely. After the double stumble of And the Children Shall Lead in Spock's brain, both well intended but poorly realized, Star Trek returned to what it had often been and was still capable of being one of the best written shows on television. All right. And Gwagnar is here as well. Hello, Gwagnar. Good to see you, sir. Okay. So we'll just go ahead and dive into this one. Let me take a drink of water right quick here. All right. So we begin with the Enterprise assigned to carry the Medeusan ambassador back to its home planet. And I'm kind of because they tend to refer to the Medeusan Kolos as a he. It seems like, but I mean, it doesn't really have a physical body. It seems like. So is it really a he? I mean, I don't know. So sometimes I may refer to it as a hit, as it, or as he. I'm not sure what to call it, honestly. So the Medusans are very alien. Their appearance is so bizarre that simply looking at a Medusan can drive a human mind to madness. But we're told that Spock, as a Vulcan, can look at the Medusan as long as he wears a special visor. And this is an interesting thing because we're kind of seeing kind of the first, I guess, maybe touches of like cosmic horror in this episode with the idea of an alien whose appearance drives you mad when you look at it. That's right out of Lovecraft, really. And they probably got it from somewhere else. Probably not from Lovecraft, but from some other writer who was inspired by Lovecraft, I would imagine. The author of this episode, which I'll talk about in the behind the scenes stuff, because this was one of the first spec scripts that was completely unsolicited, that was just submitted by a fan, that wound up being turned into an episode. And Rogues says, what surprises me about this episode was Dr. Jones is blind and addresses some sort of, well, it's not a force field, but it's like some kind of sensor device, a sensor net, they call it. Okay, so we begin with this gentleman, and his name is Marvik, and he's one of the designers of the Enterprise, we're told. And honestly, it's not really clear to me why he's here. He just seems to be here because the plot needs him to be. And of course, he's introduced to Scotty, who's kind of thrilled to meet him. And then they all excuse themselves from the room so that Spock can put this visor on and he can beam up the Medusan ambassador. And so we get kind of his POV here through these red tinted lenses. And this woman, who is Dr. Miranda Jones, she beams up and she greets Spock with the Vulcan salute, the live long and prosper. And we find out later in the episode that she's actually lived most of her life on Vulcan, although she is not Vulcan herself, learning their mental disciplines because she is a telepath herself, and she had to learn sort of a lot of the Vulcans' techniques for using their mental abilities because she couldn't really control her abilities well, I guess. He returns the salute, and then we're introduced to the ambassador, who is in this box here. And like I say, he doesn't really seem to have a physical body. And Rogue says that's why she's so cold. Well, I think that's part of it. Um, she is an interesting character. And yeah, I do think her blindness is part of it, but I think there's a little more to it than that. I think her being just on Vulcan so much, I think probably had an impact on her as well. Okay. And so, as I say, this was written actually by a fan, and I don't know how to pronounce this woman's last name. It's Jean Lizette Oresti. I'm not sure how you would pronounce it. I'll say Oresti because I'm just not sure what the proper pronunciation would be. And directed by Ralph Sineski. So Kirk alerts the crew that they need to vacate the hallways while the Medusan is being taken to his or its quarters. And this is one of the few episodes where we see a lot of extras in the hallways. And again, I think this was a reflection of the reduced budgets. In the third season, a lot of the time, unless the scene specifically calls for somebody, it seems like there aren't many people on the ship. So they clear out, and then Miranda and Spock are bringing Kolos in his little box. It's kind of like Odo, with his bucket. He's got his little box here. Wagner says Robert Bloch wrote for Star Trek, so they had some horror inspiration in previous episodes. Yeah, they did. That's true. Okay. So while they're walking and carrying the ambassador, they discuss her assignment. So her job is she's going to be going back to the Medusans' homeworld with the ambassador. And her job basically is to establish mental connection with the Medusans so that they can communicate effectively with the Medusans. Of course, the thing that puzzles me is that if they're having such a difficult time communicating with the Medusans that the only way they can really communicate with them is direct telepathy, then how did they make this arrangement in the first place? How did that even work? But oh well. And she notes that apparently Spock was offered this job himself, which he turned down, which seems kind of odd. It's like they act like Spock's the only Vulcan in Starfleet sometimes, or the Federation. And he turned it down, saying that his life is here on the Enterprise and he couldn't accept it. Now, once they get to the quarters, Spock says that he would very much like to meet the ambassador face to face or whatever. Dr. Jones, however, doesn't seem very thrilled with this, but she reluctantly agrees. So the case opens. Again, we see this kind of bright flashing green light, and we never really see much more than that. Then the box closes, and Spock tells Dr. Jones that he envies her assignment, and then she accuses him of wanting to take her place, which he denies. And at that point, he realizes that she is a telepath herself. And hello, what John Hill? So yeah, John Hill 2392. Hello, sir. Thank you for stopping by. Good to see you. Yeah, I mean it's kind of like kind of reminds you of Cyclops from the X-Men, kind of. Of course his were smaller. And I think these are actually metal. I had thought for a long time they were just plastic, probably, but I'm thinking now these frames are actually probably some kind of burnished metal, probably aluminum or tin or something. And they're very retro. Okay. Okay. Now later, um, they have this formal dinner, and it's what Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Scotty, Marvick, and Dr. Jones. You call her Dr. Jones, doll. And Kirk asks how she's able to be around Kolos without going crazy. And she says that she trained on Vulcan for several years when she was young, learning their mental disciplines, saying that it was necessary for her to preserve her sanity. Then she notices Spock's idic pin, which you see there. And she accuses Spock of wearing the pin to rub it in her face that he can mentally communicate with the ambassador more effectively than she can. Spock denies that, saying that he wore it to honor her, actually. And this edict pin, this caused a whole kerfuffle during the filming of this episode, which I'll get into in the behind the scenes stuff. Then Kirk asks if she thinks it would be possible to employ Medusans on starships in the future, saying that that would be far more efficient than the navigational techniques they use now. Rogue says, how could she see the pin? So I think it's this sensor net thing that she's wearing. It's this get a good, this kind of jeweled, I don't know what you'd call it, this kind of jeweled frock she's wearing over her clothing. I think that these jewels are all like little sensors, and I don't know how much of it is like vision and how much of it isn't. I don't know. It's kind of vague, honestly. I mean, I assume it to be not like visual, but some sort of like radar or sonar or something, maybe. Um, I don't know. As far as how she can see the pin, I mean, like, I don't know, man. Your guess is as good as mine. I'm just kind of trying to think of what might make sense. Let's see. Where was I? Okay, yeah. So she says that'll depend on her being able to establish a consistent mental link with the Medusans. McCoy asks how a woman as lovely as her can bear to spend her life looking upon so much ugliness. And then they discuss how a preference for beauty is one of the last human prejudices. And then they all drink a toast to Dr. Jones's beauty. Then Dr. Jones seems to go into kind of a trance, and then she says that she senses that someone nearby is plotting murder. Um, and I mean, look, there's only them in the room, and there's like, again, Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Scotty, her, and this guy. So, yeah, I mean, who could it be? I don't know. So Kirk asks if it's someone in the room, but then she says that she doesn't, the sense is gone, and she excuses herself for the evening. Then Marvick, he admonishes them, keep in mind that she has spent a great deal of time, or he has spent a great deal of time around her and come to appreciate her abilities. And then he excuses himself as well. Now, later, Marvick comes to Miranda's quarters to speak with her. He urges her not to go with Kolos, but she says that they've already discussed this, and she says she's going away, and that is final. Then she tells him to leave. Then she realizes that he's the one who was plotting murder earlier. And she asks, who is it that you want to kill? Is it me or someone else? And then he abruptly leaves. And he then goes to Kolos's quarters. And Kolos, he opens the box that Kolos is in, and then he pulls a phaser and attempts to phaser Kolos. But then when he looks at Kolos, the madness takes hold and he goes crazy. Eventually, and she senses what's happening. Eventually, he flees down the hallway. Now, there's definitely been some stuff cut out of this episode. Some stuff I think that was trimmed out because the next thing we see after she goes to check on Kolos is then we see Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and a couple of red shirts coming down the hall. But we never see a scene where she contacts them and tells them what's going on. They just show up. So I'm pretty sure there was a bit cut out here. So they arrive at Kolos's quarters, and Kirk asks if the ambassador is all right. She says he's unhurt, and then reveals that Marvick tried to kill him, and that he saw the Medeusan. And Spock then advises Kirk that Marvick is probably dangerously insane now, and a threat to himself and to others. So Kirk then announces to the entire ship what's going on. Now, while they're doing this, Marvick goes to engineering because Scotty earlier in the episode had invited him to come down to engineering to take a look at the place. Again, because he helped design these engines in the first place. And he invites Marvick to operate the controls. And then while Marvick is doing that, then Kirk announces over the loudspeakers over the intercom system that Marvick tried to kill Kolos and he is now probably dangerous and he is armed. So Scotty tries to stop him. They get into a fight, and I tell you, Marvick, he winds up beating up Scotty. He beats up three guys. He takes out Scotty and these two red shirts all. Presumably, the madness he's possessed with is like giving him maniacal strength or whatever. And then he takes control of the Enterprise and he yanks it off course, heading it towards the edge of the galaxy. And eventually he guns it up all the way to warp 9. Now, by the time eventually they realize what's going on, so they go to engineering to attempt to stop Marvick. And by the time they're able to actually get him off the controls and subdue him, he's taken them through the barrier at the edge of the galaxy and out into the void between galaxies. And now they're lost. McCoy tries to sedate him, but Marvick begins ranting that he can't sleep, saying that they come for you in your dreams. Then he sees Miranda. At first, he becomes calm, and speaks to her, but then eventually he gets agitated and tries to attack her. And after they pull him off of her, he warns them not to love her, and then he collapses. And McCoy announces that he is dead, Jim. Let's see. Me. All right. And Rogue said, like Lost in Space or like yeah, like Lost in Space. Definitely. Okay, now Spock speculates that when they exceeded warp 9.5, they passed into some sort of extra dimensional void and are no longer in normal space, and now they have no way to find their way back. Kirk asks if Kolos could navigate his way back to the galaxy, since Medusans have some sort of sense that makes them very accomplished navigators. Spock considers this a possibility, but says that Kolos would be unable to manipulate the controls, and he would have to form a mind meld basically with Kolos in an attempt to navigate the ship back to the galaxy. However, he notes that Dr. Jones has been very resentful of Spock's attempts to interact with the ambassador, and she might even use her telepathy to interfere with the link if she realizes what Spock is doing, and suggests that they would need to have some sort of distraction to keep her occupied while Spock performs the mind meld. And of course, Kirk knows just what is needed for this situation. He is going to riz her up. So he takes her to this arboretum filled with flowers, and they talk, and he says that she shouldn't blame herself for what happened to Marvick. Um, I don't know. There's no indication that she did. She didn't really seem to give a squat about Marvick one way or the other. She says that she never asked for his love and couldn't return it. Kirk suggests that she will want human companionship eventually. And she says that human companionship would mean being constantly assaulted by the thoughts of other people. And she prefers actually not being around other people at all. Kirk says that at some point she will surely want to be around others who aren't hideous like the Medusans. And this upsets her. She questions whether Kolos is really ugly or not. And, who are we to say? Surely we're just as ugly to them as they are to us, that sort of thing. So Kirk tries to mollify her and tries turning on the charm, but she clearly just isn't having it. And then she senses that Spock is in Kolos's quarters, and she warns that he must be stopped. Kirk tries to stop her from leaving, but she demands to be let go, and she goes back to her quarters. So they arrive at Kolos's quarters, and Spock says that he must be the one to do this, even though her telepathic skills are greater than his. She insists that she should be the one to work for him, or work with Kolos, but Spock notes that whoever does so will have to pilot the ship, and, she doesn't know how to do that. And so she suggests that, well, you just train me to operate the ship. And then McCoy says that while she's a very accomplished and she can do almost anything that a sighted person can do, she can't pilot a starship. And of course, this kind of throws Kirk and Spock as they realize that Miranda is blind. And the jeweled sort of, like I say, I don't know what you call it, that she wears is actually a sophisticated sensor net that aids her in perceiving her surroundings. She tells them that she won't allow Spock to mind meld with Kolos, and McCoy asks her as a fellow doctor not to interfere in this. Then Kirk suggests that she ask Kolos what Kolos wants to do. And I thought that was interesting because, she really is kind of speaking for Kolos here, saying, I don't want this. It's basically she didn't want it because she doesn't want it. She doesn't really take into consideration, well, what does Kolos want here? What would Kolos like to do? How would he like to handle this? And she never really seems to care about that. I get the sense that, that this assignment, doing this and establishing this mind link with the Medusans, it's important to her because basically it'll make her special, because she'll be the only one who can do it. And it's going to single her out as being this special person. And so anything that kind of comes in between that, like Spock or someone else doing it, really bothers her, but it's more that than it is that she really cares about the Medusans themselves or anything like that. At least that's kind of the impression I get. So she goes into the room to see Kolos, and then later she emerges and says that basically she has no choice but to agree to what you're doing. So evidently Kolos is okay with it. So they set up this barrier on the bridge next to Spock's sensor station. And Spock goes behind it and opens up the box, and he performs the mind meld with Kolos. And of course, it definitely has an effect on him because after he shuts the box and takes the visor off, he becomes very jovial and he's smiling and friendly. And of course, he recognizes everybody, but even though he, in a way, doesn't know them. And it's a fun scene because, obviously we don't see Spock being this expressive very often. And of course, he sees Miranda and speaks with her as well. So then Kirk suggests they get going. So Spock, or Kolos in this case, however you want to say it, takes Sulu's spot at the navigate or at the helm, and then they plot a course back. And of course, it does work. They obviously aren't going to stay stuck out there forever, and so eventually he flies them back to the galaxy, back through the barrier, and back into normal space. And it's after that he has this little monologue where he talks about how interesting it is being this sort of corporeal form now when, like I say, it seems like the Medusans are kind of formless. They seem to be just light or something. And again, he notes how it's also very isolating and how alone they are. Then Kirk suggests that it's really probably best if you end the mind meld now. And Kolos agrees. So he goes back behind the barrier, opens up the box. But then while this is going on, Sulu notices that the visor was left at the helm station. And then Kirk screams at Spock to close his eyes and not look. But it's too late. And Spock emerges and he's clearly not okay. He's clearly disturbed. And they did this with Marvick as well, as when a person's under this sort of madness, they switch to this kind of fisheye or wide angle lens to I guess to note this kind of skewed or distorted perspective or whatever. And so Spock goes berserk and attacks everybody. And then one of the red shirts drops a phaser. Kirk picks it up and he stuns Spock, ending the fight. So they take him to sickbay. And at this point, Spock is catatonic, pretty much, and seems to be dying. And Miranda is using her telepathy to try and restore Spock's sanity. Now, out in the hallway, Kirk and McCoy are talking. And Kirk wonders if Miranda really even wants to save Spock, noting how much she seems to resent him, and wonders if she's really doing everything she can to help. And eventually, he can't resist. He can't stand sitting out here waiting, and he goes into sickbay and he confronts her and basically tells her as much to her face, telling her that he thinks she doesn't really, it's not working because she doesn't really want to save Spock, and she wants him to go away. She wants him to be lost because she doesn't want anyone to threaten her position as the link with the Medusans. And I mean, he gets pretty vicious with her, really. Um, but eventually he backs off and realizes he's probably gone a little too far. And he leaves. And he tells McCoy, yeah, I probably said a little too much. And yeah, he probably did. But then she resumes her attempts to restore Spock's mind. And it does work. And eventually he is restored. And later, they rendezvous with a transport that is going to take them, I guess, on for the rest of the way to the Medusans' homeworld, I guess. And Kolos and Dr. Miranda come to the transporter room, and Spock has his Idic medallion on. And Kirk gives her a flower. Um, Again, kind of referring to the whole thing of beauty. Basically, there's something about how she won't see much beauty where she's going, or something like this. So you could take this, what have you. And she actually thanks him for sort of making her see herself. Sort of the truth about herself, because basically he was kind of right about what he had said to her. And she and Spock also have a little discussion, and they mention the IDIC pin, infinite IDIC being IDIC, infinite diversity and infinite combinations. And the episode ends there as they beam over to the ship. And again, the guest star was Diana Muldaur as Dr. Miranda Jones, this, of course, being her second episode of Star Trek. And, of course, she would go on to be Dr. Pulaski on Next Generation for the second season of that show. And David Frankham played Marvick. Okay. Let me take another drink of water here right quick before I resume, and then we'll look at the behind the scenes stuff here. All right. Okay, so in this story, Kolos, and let me bring that back up. And so originally, the character Kolos was originally named Ariel, actually. And the characters of Ariel and Kolo, or of Ariel and Miranda, from the Dr. Miranda Jones, those are both references to The Tempest, the Shakespearean play, actually. Because in the play, of course, these people are marooned on this island, and Ariel is this kind of fairy-like creature, and he's sort of charged with trying to help them navigate their way back to civilization. So the author for this, again, Jean Lizette Aresti, I don't know how you say it. She was 35, and she was well versed in Greek mythology, Shakespeare, and 17th century poetry. She was a librarian at Harvard from 1954 until 1962, and later was a librarian at UCLA when she decided to try her hand at a teleplay for her favorite TV show, which was Star Trek. She says, quote, Roddenberry had a great thing going there. It was really a terrific concept, and he had people who carried it through with great skill. The thing about Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, it's sort of like the Elizabethan idea of the human being. There's the animal mind, which has emotions. Then there's the rational mind, and then there is the will. And I always thought that those three characters embodied that. McCoy being concerned with the body, also with emotions, was sort of the animal. Spock was the rational part, and Kirk was the will. Aresti, recalling the inspiration for her story, said, quote, I got the idea from an ad in New Scientist magazine, and the caption of it was something like, it's 2050 AD, two men are playing tennis, but one of them is blind, but you can't tell which one. I thought, and I guess that's a reference to someone using technology to see, I guess. And I thought, okay, how would someone be equipped to act so much like a sighted person that you could not tell? And that's where the idea came from. Miranda is blind and then forced to see herself through Kirk's eyes. In a way, he gives her vision, or self vision. The road to Aresti selling her first TV script came when she met the author of 30 crime novels, who had also, as a lark, just sold a pair of teleplays to the Batman TV show. She says, quote, I was at a party and I met Peter Rabe, the author. And Peter Rabe's brother had worked with me at the Harvard Library. As we talked, I said I had with, or as I talked with Rabe, I said I had an idea for Star Trek. And after I told it to him, he said, why don't you send it to my agent? So I called her and she invited me to send in a 5-page treatment. The title of Areste's story was originally Miranda, incorporated with the idea of a blind woman who masquerades as one with sight, was the reason for her being on the Enterprise and for her blindness. Her association with an alien ambassador ugly enough to cause madness in humans. Aresti was again drawing from her love of classic literature. She said, quote, "We had a meeting and then Bess, that's the agent that she met with, sent that treatment to the producers and they liked it enough that I went off to Paramount and talked to Freiberger, Justman, and Arthur Singer. Afterwards, I found a phone booth and called Bess and said, I just spoke with him. And she said, I know, I just signed a contract for you." Aresti's offbeat love story, which also presented a good role for Spock, gave truth to the expression being in the right place at the right time. Producer Fred Freiberger had been told by NBC to find a way to attract more female viewers, and he believed the best means in doing so was with more prominent female characters and more love stories. Co-producer Robert Justman at the same time had been on the lookout for a story featuring Spock. Of the 16 assignments that Roddenberry had given out for season 3, there was not a single Spock story, or a Scotty story for that matter, or one for Chekhov, the cast member Roddenberry wanted to put more emphasis on. The Enterprise in its original versions really didn't include Spock seducing the Romulan commander, for example. It was more a story about Kirk going undercover. And even Spock's brain was really more about Kirk dealing with the loss of Spock rather than with Spock himself. And Roddenberry wrote across Justman's memo that he agreed that having more appealing to female viewers was a good idea. And that put the burden on Robert Justman to find suitable material to put an emphasis on Spock and the others. That's when Justman came across Miranda in a stack of unsolicited stories and scripts. Rusty's first task after being called in and her test was to flesh out her story outline, adding in ideas given to her by Freiberger, Justman, and script editor Arthur Singer. This was the official outline, the one that she was paid for, and mailed to Star Trek on May 7th, 1968. Freiberger put Arthur Singer with Aresti, who would guide her through the process of revising the story. Aresti recalled, Arthur Singer told me that the compelling motive of any good story was usually obsession. In this case, Marvick is obsessed with Miranda, and for this early stage in the story's development, not just jealous of Ariel, but also jealous of Kirk and McCoy, who are showering the woman with attention. Miranda, meanwhile, is obsessed with Ariel, and this, or who would later be Kolos, and this extreme thinking creates a degree of paranoia concerning her feelings about Spock and a threat she imagined he poses. The new outline for May 24th had a new title as well. This one conveyed the theme of the story rather than putting attention on the female character. Is There in Truth No Beauty comes from a stand-in English poet and clergyman George Herbert's 17th century poem, Jordan. The stanza asks, quote, "Who says that fictions only and false hair become a verse? Is there in truth no beauty?" Star Trek had often made comment as to how fictions and false hair did not ensure beauty, wisdom, or good intent. In episodes such as The Return of the Archons, The Apple, and The Children Shall Leave, and perceived ugliness did not rightfully translate to evil, as in Arena or The Devil in the Dark. Aresti, utilizing the theme of beauty and what is true, gave a generous nod to Herbert. NBC approved the story, and Aresti was instructed to proceed to script. Her first draft teleplay was dated June 18th. It needed enough work to warrant a free rewrite to be designated as a revised first draft. Aresti, of course, was willing. She later said, quote, "I wrote the script. That was the main thing. Otherwise, if they had been persuaded by that, I think I would have just been able to sell only the story." Aresti's revised first draft arrived on June 26. It was still not good enough. And she said, I kept on being revised. They said, well, we can't do that and we can't do this. And that's a nice effect, but it would take too long or it would cost too much, things like that. Aresti was getting a crash course on how to write within the limitations of TV. She said, Arthur Singer worked closest with me on that. He was a very nice person with a good sense of humor and was more than anything else encouraging. He definitely did seem to respect the writers. I liked Fred Freiberger too. He sat in on many of my meetings. I can't recall him suggesting things to do, but he recognized good ideas. When something had to be changed, I didn't always know why until later. For example, I wanted Kolos to be referred to as a Gorgon, and they said, well, we can't do that. And I didn't know at the time. Later on, I discovered it was because they had Melvin Belli playing Gorgon, the friendly angel, in And for the Children Shall Lead, which, yeah, that was just 2 episodes ago. Aresti's Polish, her official second draft, arrived on July 5th. Is There in Truth No Beauty had evolved into a first rate script, especially considering it had come from a television novice. Giving Oresti a pat on the back, Freiberger sent the script to the Mimeo department to have it forwarded to NBC. And Rogues asks, I wonder if Oresti wrote other episodes. I don't think she wrote any Star Trek. I don't know. She may have written for some other show. I don't know. Maybe after I'm done here, we'll maybe look at IMDb. See, why don't we just do that? Let's just take a look right quick at IMDb and see if she's got anything there. I'm guessing no. If she had, I think they probably would have mentioned it here in the book, and they don't say anything. But who knows? Is that? Okay, there she is. Oh, you know what? I was wrong. It looks like she wrote 2 episodes, it looks like. Okay, well, it says she wrote 2 episodes, but it doesn't give the titles. Huh. It's weird. Okay, yeah, I don't know. It says she wrote 2 episodes, so I don't know. Let's look at maybe Wikipedia, we'll say. Let's see, Gene. Okay. Okay, so on Wikipedia it says, so yeah, she did Is There in Truth No Beauty? She then sold a story to the show called A Handful of Dust, and that was eventually turned into the episode All Our Yesterdays. So she wrote All Our Yesterdays as well, or at least the original story for it. She died in 2020, looks like. Yeah, so okay, 2 episodes. Oh yeah, Guagnar. Guagnar's got it right there. All Our Yesterdays. Okay, he beat me to it. Okay. So in Oresti's final version of the script, Marvick, after going mad, invades the bridge, knocks out a guard, then uses the guard's phaser to stun 2 other crewmen, and then struggles with Chekhov, knocking him unconscious. After changing the ship's course and sending it speeding into a void, he struggles with Kirk and 2 security guards who have arrived on the bridge. Now, this later got changed because at the end of the episode or later in the episode, there's also the fight with Spock on the bridge, and they felt it was too repetitive, so eventually they moved the fight with Marvick down into engineering. Aresti later said, quote, I had some very specific ideas about the effects, the things I wanted them to show concerning what was going on in Spock's mind, and Miranda trying to pull him back. That was the one where they said, no, we can't do that. It's just going to be too elaborate and too expensive. In Singer's rewrite, the script contained less action and was also less confusing and less expensive to film. There was another trade. Without disturbing the interplay between the characters or the message of the material, Singer inserted something NBC might consider added excitement and perhaps heightened jeopardy by allowing us to look into the box that contained the Medeusan with its maddening light show of images. Aresti said, quote, "The way I wrote the Medeusan is that none of the viewers were ever supposed to see what was in the container. It was entirely the reaction, us just imagining what it looked like. I think they did it pretty well, except that they were trying to telegraph Miranda's secret and kept on dancing around it, and it didn't come out quite the way I had imagined it." In Singer's rewrite, the character of Marvick is better realized. Aresti had him portrayed as pretty much a one-note character. And again, he's angry. He's jealous not only of Kolos, but also of Kirk and McCoy as well. After Arthur Singer did a rewrite, he comes out as being a bit more of a realistic character. Let's see. Now, Freiberger had another request of Singer, and that was to make the script shorter. Of the 6 episodes filmed so far in the 3rd season, each one had run long, requiring numerous lines of dialogue and sometimes even entire scenes to be left on the editing room floor. Star Trek could no longer afford to shoot film that wouldn't be used. Therefore, with his final draft dated July 12th, Singer edited Aresti's teleplay down from 67 pages to 57. The first script of the season to weigh in at less than 60 pages. Sadly, with these cuts, a handful of good lines of dialogue were lost. One from the dinner scene had Miranda explain, quote, "Medeusans don't have names as we understand them. They really aren't named Medeusans either. That's just what we call them." And this trim would have major repercussions. Without the explanation, the writing implied that this race of creatures ugly enough to drive humans mad is just coincidentally having the same name as a mythical creature. And then, and then the situation got worse. Gene Roddenberry got hold of the script uh, on July 15th. Among other changes, Roddenberry changed the spelling of the Medusans to Mindusans, which would eventually be changed back to Medusans in other rewrites. This would have been fine, but the dialogue that told us why humans named them this, and it was not a name which they called themselves, was not put back into the script. Because Roddenberry was working off of the final draft, which had some of that dialogue missing. But it was another change made by Roddenberry, which would cause the first rebellion by the Star Trek cast on set. And I'll get into that when we get into the shooting of the episode. Okay, so Ralph Sineski was brought in to direct. Sineski had shown a knack for handling offbeat love stories in episodes such as This Side of Paradise, Metamorphosis, and Return to Tomorrow. And that was the one, of course, that Diana Muldaur had already been in. Interviewed for this book, he said, "I thought the script for that came close in many aspects to Metamorphosis, and had Gene Coon still been there, and we had still been under Desilu's reign, it could have been as good, or at least as almost as good as Metamorphosis. It had some fine writing and fine scenes. It was the type of material that gave actors a chance to really act. It gave Leonard a chance to move beyond Spock in even a broader way than Paradise had given him." I don't agree with that. I think This Side of Paradise is a better episode for him. So Sineski's first and only choice for the demanding role of Larry Marvick was David Frankham. Did I skip over him already? I guess I did. There he is. I can find a better image for him. Let me see. There he is. In the story, Marvick deteriorates from professional and brilliant to begging for love, then obsessed with jealousy to the point of homicide, and finally driven to hysterical madness. Few actors can pull this off, but Frankham had proven his dramatic range before Star Trek. He was actually the antagonist in Return of the Fly, which required its share of hysterics. Plus, he had played a space officer from Earth, imprisoned and tortured by aliens in the Outer Limits episode Nightmare, and again in another Outer Limits episode called Don't Open Till Doomsday. He also co starred with Vincent Price in the 1961 film Master of the World. Quote, Ralph booked me for that Star Trek episode, Frankham confirmed. We had done an episode of 12 O'Clock High together right around 1965, and I kind of ran amok in that episode, which is why I think Ralph thought about me when he got this script for Star Trek. Finding the right actress for the role of Dr. Miranda Jones was essential to the success of the episode. Everyone agreed that Jessica Walter would be the ideal choice. She was working regularly on TV, and 3 years earlier, she had played William Shatner's wife on his first TV show, For the People. But when Walter became unavailable, Sineski brought up Diana Muldaur's name. But Muldaur had been featured so prominently in the previous season's episode Return to Tomorrow that Robert Justman was certain it would be a mistake to bring her back. Sineski said, we went through the casting list again, and then I asked what would happen if we just put a black wig on Diana. Bobby Justman finally relented and said, okay. And so we went with her. Peter Greenwood, and that was Fred Freiberger's assistant, said, quote, Fred thought she did just a beautiful job. He said that the sensitivity of her performance was just superb. Casting director Joe DaGosta said, quote, there was always something for Diana whenever you had a demanding part for a woman. She was sexy because she was a lady, so whenever the role had some sophistication, Diana was always on the list. Usually they don't repeat guest stars, but everybody was just so pleased with her work and wanted her back. Some familiar faces abound in this ship-based episode. William Blackburn returns as Lieutenant Hadley, Frank Da Vinci as Lieutenant Brent, and Roger Holloway as Lieutenant Limley. Vince Diedrich in a red shirt with graying blonde hair is part of the scuffle in engineering. He had previously played Matthews. He's the red-shirted security man who gets pushed to his death by Ruck in the episode What Are Little Girls Made Of? Lou Elias, also in red and also part of that fight, was first seen in Dagger of the Mind as a security guard, fried to death when he was pushed into an electrical grid. He more often played red-shirted crewmen, including the episode And the Children Shall Lead, as one who fights with Scotty in auxiliary control. And I didn't get a lot of images of these guys, but here's a couple of them. Because they mostly appear in fight scenes, and they're all kind of jumbled and blurry. And I forget which one that is, but this is Eddie Paskey right here I'm going to talk about. And, if you've watched my Trek Talks, I've talked about Eddie Paskey before. He had appeared in dozens of episodes as Lieutenant Leslie and served as William Shatner's lighting stand-in. And he was present during the fight on the bridge, but he did not make it through the episode due to an injury, which would result in him leaving the series for good. And I'll get to that here in a moment. Okay, so this episode was a bottle show. So only, the previously standing sets were used. David Frankham recalls, quote, Diana Muldaur and I were walking across the setting in costume and makeup and preparing for the first master shot, and George Takei came over and said, welcome to the Enterprise. It was a lovely gesture. Like many guest performers who visited stages 9 and 10, Frankham was immediately taken in by the marvel of it all. He said, quote, beautiful sets. Obviously, they spent a great deal of money on that series. You walk onto what you think is a television set, but no, this is a big-time movie by the looks of it. Absolutely, for that time period, it was a very impressive job on those sets. When you're a jobbing actor, you often think, okay, well, that's done. Now on to the next job. You finish that and then go on to the next. But then I walked on and, well, you look at the set and then here's George welcoming you on the Enterprise and you think there's something special about all this. And there was, of course. Those actors were devoted to their characters in that series. It was just so nice to be a part of it. But this first morning, real life provided more conflict than just the teleplay. So the trouble had begun the day before, on July 15th, when a set of revised pages were put into the final draft script. Leonard Nimoy said, quote, "There was another incident that damaged the relationship between Gene and me. I was reading a script and I noticed there's a scene between Diana Muldaur and me which goes on for several pages, which I feel is just deadly dull and almost completely pointless. I was really agitated about the scene because we were both just babbling and I complained about it. But once again, I couldn't get anywhere with Fred Freiberger because his attitude was basically just go away, actor. I'm working on the next show. At least that was my sense of it." The scene involved and the scene he's talking about, and I'm thinking it's the one at the end of the episode because this is where Spock and her kind of go on about the Idic pin at length, and he mentions what the meaning of the Idic pin and all that. So the scene involved a Vulcan medallion called the Idic. The concept behind Idic was something Gene Roddenberry believed in. The Enterprise's multiracial crew was evidence of that, but as written, it seemed to be just pure filler. Nimoy bypassed Freiberger and called Roddenberry directly. Without revealing that he was the one who had written the scene in the first place, Roddenberry promised to deal with it. He then did a rewrite and sent the new pages over to Star Trek offices. This was on July 16th, was the first day of shooting for the episode. Freiberger said, quote, "Gene Roddenberry had turned his back on the show. So we got the script changed, and my story consultant, Arthur Singer, and I just looked at each other and he asked, what can we do about this? And I replied, Gene Roddenberry created the show and he's the executive producer. He calls the shots, so just send it down to the set." Nimoy added, quote, "Overnight, the irrelevant scene had been replaced with a scene that was far more irrelevant. The dialogue now consisted of Diana Muldaur asking me something like, what's that medallion you're wearing, Spock? And then I explain it's an edict. And then I proceed to spend the next page and a half explaining exactly what this edict is and why it's so great. And by now I'm thinking to myself, this is bizarre. Ralph Sineski recalled, quote, "The cast literally refused to shoot the script." Jay Jones, seen in many episodes of Star Trek, said, quote, "There seemed to be a problem between Gene and the actors. Gene was marketing everything related to the series, buttons and that sort of stuff. He was just being a businessman, but some of the cast didn't feel that was correct. They were in it for the art." William Shatner recalled, quote, "The show was getting sloppy. Our scripts were suffering and cancellation seemed a probability. Making matters worse, it had become clear that Gene had drifted away from the show with no intention of ever getting seriously re-involved on a creative level. Most disheartening of all, however, were Gene Roddenberry's blatant attempts to milk every possible cent from his dying cash cow, even at the expense of our scripts." Now, unknown to Shatner, Roddenberry had been creatively involved, at least with the story assignments he gave out. Is There in Truth No Beauty was the first script, actually, where he had originally had no involvement in it until he got a hold of it and shoved this scene in. Freiberger said, quote, "I went down and Shatner and Nimoy were refusing to do the scene. They said, Gene's trying to sell merch. We don't want to do this medallion thing. So I called him up and said, Gene, we have a mutiny on our hands." Sineski remembers it differently, saying, quote, "Leonard had called Freiberger and told him there was a problem, and he refused to do anything about it. He didn't come down to the set. I hadn't even met him yet. So Leonard was the one who called Gene, and Gene came to the set. Their problem was with the pin, the edict, which in the original script went on for about another half page. They felt that Gene was obviously planning to sell it, and they just didn't like that idea. They weren't necessarily antagonistic, they just stated their point. And Gene, of course, denied that he was being commercial about it. It got a little heated. I don't remember ever getting into yelling, but I think there was resentment and there was a difference of opinion. Shatner said that from the look on Roddenberry's face, he could see the inclusion of the medallion in the episode was of immense importance. And he was right. The first issue of Inside Star Trek, which was a fan magazine that Roddenberry was publishing, had already been mailed out. And in this first issue, they were already talking about the edict pen and how it was going to appear in upcoming episodes. Nimoy said, quote, "What bothered me most about all this was my sense of loss in regard to Gene. I mean, if Gene was at his best and on his game, he could help you enormously with the script. Sadly, though, by this time he had refocused his attention and his energies into Lincoln Enterprises, which was his mail order business." Quote, "I've heard the accusations that I abandoned the series," Roddenberry said when interviewed by this author. "You'll see in the memos that this was not the case. I assigned many of those scripts and gave input. I attended screenings of the rough edits and gave notes, but I kept a low profile because I told NBC I would not produce the series if they put it at 10 o'clock Fridays. I couldn't let the cast or anyone else working on the show come directly to me with their problems. You don't do that when you have someone else producing the series, so some of them have since said they felt abandoned." Regarding his intent for adding the IDIC into a Star Trek script and the marketing of the medallion, Roddenberry said, quote, "The inclusion of the IDIC in that script was valid." Okay. "I truly believe in the statement and the message behind it. Why wouldn't I want it to be in the show, in that episode in particular, because of the woman character having studied on Vulcan? And then taking that philosophy and making it available to the fans was something I wanted to do. Look, tie-in merchandising is part of the business of television. We had it on Star Trek from the start with toys and comic books and the ship model and the record albums. Leonard didn't seem to mind making those records." And he has a point here. Nimoy didn't mind making the records because he was getting paid for it. But he felt that marketing the IDIC was wrong somehow. He missed the point. If we were going to sell anything, it should be something with a positive message and philosophy behind it. Frankum, watching all this from the sideline, said, quote, "They spoke quietly to each other, and then Nimoy and Shatner said, well, this script as it stands is not acceptable, so we're going home and get in touch with us when it's rewritten." And I thought it was unbelievable. I watched them just walk off the sets, and I thought, you can't go home. You're the stars. We're supposed to be shooting. I like them both. I mean, nothing against them whatsoever, but I thought, what do we do now? And poor Ralph was standing there probably as surprised as we were. It was a brilliant script, and I understand that being protective of it, but it put us all in a bit of a roller coaster ride. The final result of the long morning discussion was that Gene agreed to rewrite the scene, Sineski said, but that took it off the schedule for that first day of filming. The balance of the day's schedule was 4 short sequences in the Enterprise corridor that totaled a page and a half. I did not want my first day's work to be limited to a page and a half, so I suggested we do a strong 3-page scene between Dinah Muldaur and David Frankham, which I'm guessing is the scene where, he comes to her quarters. Uh, it's probably this scene here. Frankham said, so suddenly poor Ralph Sineski looked at Diana and me and said, well, I know your little tense scene isn't scheduled until later in the week, but that's all we have to shoot. Fortunately, Diane and I had learned all of our scenes and we went right into that. It was sink or swim, and we were so loyal to Ralph, we were determined to get it right for his sake, too. And I'm a great admirer of Diana because she was so cool. She just rose to the occasion, and I think we all took our cue from her. She said, all right, okay, let's get it done. Nimoy may have left the set, but not the studio. Peter Greenwood gave credit to William Shatner for that, recalling, the one that broke that stalemate on the Rebellion was Shatner. Shatner came in on the side of Fred and helped him get through it. That was one of the things that Fred said that he would be eternally grateful to Shatner for, was ending the stalemate over the jewelry. So the upshot of this was that they wound up about again, way behind on their filming for the first day, about a half day behind. Now, production resumed the next day with Kirk and Miranda's scene in the herbarium, or the arboretum, whatever you call it. Now, due to her work schedule at UCLA, Jean Lizette Oresti was only able to visit the set on this one day. She said, I didn't get to meet Leonard Nimoy. He wasn't there when they were filming the scene that was in the conservatory. William Shatner was in it, and he was very nice, very gracious, very warm and funny. If a line was flubbed, he would make a joke out of it. And Then they did the scenes where McCoy reveals that Miranda is blind. They wound up going about a day over time on the second day as well. On day 3, the dining room scene was filmed. This one here. And that took up most of the day. The rewrite that was promised by Roddenberry was late in arriving, therefore Sineski and cast took matters into their own hands. Eddie Paskey recalled, quote, the director and Leonard and Bill were in the briefing room, which was redressed as the dining room, and rewriting the script as we were shooting it. I remember Leonard and Bill both would be saying, hey, wait a minute, Spock wouldn't do this, or Bill would say, wait a minute, Kirk wouldn't do that. The beautiful part of that was those guys knew their characters in their own minds, and I don't think the writers at that point had a grasp on the characters as well as they did. Thank God the actors were professionals and they could fix those lines. And then the cinematographer, Jerry Finneman, said, quote, my favorite director was Ralph Sineski. I always found Ralph to be the most sensitive. He did 2 or 3 shows that I just thought the directing was really wonderful. It reminded me of the old days in feature film. Okay, now Eddie Paskey, getting back to him again, and you see him right here in this scene. William Shatner's lighting stand-in was doing now he was injured during the fight scene on the bridge with Spock. Let me, and again, I don't think I have a good shot of him in this fight scene because I don't know, that might be him down here. I don't think it is. But anyway, he recalls, quote, Leonard kind of gave me, so Leonard nerve pinched him, I guess, did the nerve pinch on him. And we all know, when people get pinched like that, they have that sort of exaggerated reaction where their body kind of twitches, right? They kind of contort and then they collapse or whatever. So he was pinching him, but at the same time that he pinched him, he also shoved him. And so he was falling backwards and then did that kind of twitch where he kind of threw his back up and backwards. And he hit the railing. I guess the metal railing, or not metal, but the wooden. It was probably wooden. The wooden railing here, and he threw his. I thrust myself backwards, and my back went up against the railing of the bridge. I heard the thing go crack, and holy moly, I had instant pain and fell over like a pretzel. I stopped, and I had to go out in the alley behind the stage for maybe 15 or 20 minutes, just trying to get myself to stand back up straight. And that's what really told me that it was my time to leave the show. So it turns out Paskey had actually been in pain for a while. Uh, he apparently had a back injury as a child. It doesn't specify what, but he had chronic back pain since he was a child, and he had numerous back surgeries. Apparently, oh, actually, yeah, okay. So this may have been caused because actually one of his legs was shorter than the other. And they say here, if you pay close attention in some scenes, you can see him kind of walking funny. And I guess it's the uneven walk, caused by the different leg lengths that led to him developing chronic back pain. In addition, he had also, like a few years earlier, he had been in a car wreck, and that gave him like a head injury and whiplash, and that left him prone to migraines. And of course, people who are susceptible to migraines are often sensitive to bright lights. And of course, what do you tend to have on TV and movie sets? Well, lots of bright lights. And they caused him cluster headaches. Paskey said cluster headaches are why I had to leave the show because the heavy lighting that I was under every day with my pale blue eyes made me more susceptible. I was just in agony almost to the point where I was dead. And then when I had the back injury in that last scene I was in, I thought, that's it. I just can't handle this anymore. So that's why I quit. I was sorry to do it because I loved being a part of Star Trek. So Paskey was in 59 episodes altogether. And I believe aside from Shatner and McCoy and Spock, and Nimoy, um, And I don't know, maybe Scotty too. I'm not sure. I believe he's actually in more episodes than anybody, except for those guys. Okay. And Rogue said, yeah, he didn't sue them. Yeah, I mean, I guess the rules were probably different back then, maybe. I don't know. Um, and it may have been him having a pre-existing issue with his back that may have been a factor too. I don't know. But yeah, they're probably lucky he didn't sue them. Okay, Sineski said, once we got past the problem involving the IDIC pin, it was nice material to work with. Jerry Finneman was still there, and this was another show that he lit beautifully. It was a pleasure to do. Frankham said, it's so nice to know that people appreciate our contributions as actors, but it's also beautiful writing and beautiful directing too. Ralph is just terrific. Just a few words in your ear per take will color your whole approach to what you're about to do. He did that on 12 o'clock high, exactly the same thing when I was working with him there. You're so keyed up anyway, and you only have a short time to rehearse it before they start rolling the cameras, and Ralph made it a much easier experience. Ralph Sineski had done excellent work, and because of the actor's rebellion, he was not held entirely responsible for running a day behind schedule, with numerous instances of nightly overtime. But Douglas Kramer over at NBC instructed Fred Freiberger to keep a close eye on Sineski for his next directing assignment, which would be the Tholian Web. Oh, yeah, and then here's another thing. So at the end of the episode, now, of course, at the beginning of the episode, right? Kirk and all the other people leave the room while uh, Kolos is beaming in. Um, Not entirely sure why, because they never open the box. But I guess maybe because the box would be transporting it for a moment, it would be immaterial, so you could maybe see through it or something. I don't know. But in the beginning of the episode, everyone leaves except Spock, who's wearing the visor. But then here at the end, and I guess I didn't get a good picture of it or image of it, but in this episode, Spock puts the visor on, and then he has uh, Dr. Jones and Kolos beam out, but Shatner's still there in the room. Kirk is still there in the room, and he doesn't have a visor on. And it's an obvious screw up. And apparently, this was something that was done in the editing because he had not originally done it like that. And apparently, the editors came in and somehow toyed with the footage and changed it so it seemed like that, like after the fact. And Sineski was not happy about it. Okay. Okay, now Gene Roddenberry screened the episode prior to the music being added in to make sure that his IDIC pin was well represented. In a memo to Freiberger, Roddenberry wrote, quote, Spock's dialogue needs speeding up. He seems to get slower and slower with each episode. Again, in this episode as in the past, we get the feeling there are only 8 or 10 people aboard the ship and that it is a rather dull place. We need more background people and activities. And of course, in previous streams on this season, Roddenberry had made that observation before that, the ship seems to be too empty. We need more extras. But I'm sure that was a budgetary thing. I'm sure that Freiberger was just trying to save money to devote it to other things and couldn't afford to have a bunch of extras running around. The new restrictive budget mandated that the third season Enterprise be exactly as Roddenberry had described it, a rather dull place. In time, Roddenberry would become resentful over Freiberger's lack of responsiveness in this area. As a result of Freiberger's frugalness, however, this episode came in $11,237 under budget, helping compensate for the overspending on some of the previous shows. The season's deficit was now down to $5,559, which I don't know. In today's dollars, what would that be? Probably about 30 grand or something. I don't know. So Jean Lizette Rosti was in front of her TV, tuned to NBC the night her first script sale aired. She said, quote, I remember watching it with great interest because I wanted to see how it came out. But before it came on here in California, I got a call from my parents in Wisconsin who saw it a couple hours earlier, and they said, it's wonderful. And then we got it out here a couple of hours later, and I saw it and thought it came out very well too. And so this aired Friday, October 18th, and it came in second in the ratings, barely. The CBS Friday Night Movie won the night as usual. With a 39% audience share. Star Trek came in second with a 23% audience share, which was just a couple of points ahead of the ABC show Judd for the Defense. And the same thing basically played out in the second half hour. It came in narrowly, just barely in second. Now, because of the fuss created on set, the release of the IDIC pin was delayed several months until, or actually for the better part of a year, until June 1969. And the cause of the ruckus was a 22 karat gold plate circle. Hold on, let me bring up, that one image close up on it. There it is. So the cause of the ruckus was a 22 karat gold plated circle with a Florentine silver, which was actually rhodium plating, triangle set against a white gemstone. The whole thing cost $7.50. Regarding the philosophy behind the edict, Roddenberry said, quote, until humans learn to tolerate, no, that's not enough to positively value each other. Until we can value the diversity here on Earth, and we don't deserve to go into outer space and encounter the infinite diversity out there. So this was one of Fred Freiberger's favorite episodes. He said, quote, we did a lot of morality shows, and I thought this was a hell of an example of one. Hopefully it will teach the viewer to be more tolerant. Gene Roddenberry, from a 1968 newspaper piece that ran the week after this episode aired, said, quote, part of our philosophy is to be different. But to be different is not necessarily to be ugly. That's one reason the youth digs us. at the at the heart of the whole youth movement is to the demand that we drop our hypocrisies. So Rogue says 750. How much was that back in 68? That's a good question. I mean, again, I would guess probably around 30, $40, probably something like that. Yeah, so the youths dig us. Dinah Muldar, remembering the problems over the script, said, quote, at the time, I said, you know what, this is it. I'm just going to go back to theater. Thank you very much. But then I saw the episode, and it was this wonderful show. I absolutely loved it. I was surprised at how good I was. David Frankham said, quote, it makes me feel wonderful that so many people not only remember it and still appreciate it, but that there are new fans coming up all the time. These letters that come in are from people in different countries, suddenly contacting me more than 40 years after that job, and I'm just shaking my head in disbelief. And I'm really so grateful that people love the show and have taken the time to put something down on paper and mail letters to me from overseas. Of all the shows I've done, I'm just finding out that this is the one that people seem to remember me from because they love every episode of the series, and I just happened to be in that one. Once I said to a young fan, my God, we did that show decades ago. And he said, that show never ages, though. What a wonderful thing to have fans like that. Okay, so that's going to do it for Is There in Truth No Beauty? Okay, so now the next episode is The Empath. But I think instead of doing that next week, what I'm going to do is I assume most of you know that the Axanar fan film, Axanar The Gathering Storm, was released on YouTube Sunday. I don't know if you've seen it yet. I did. I'll probably watch it again. But I think next week's Trek Talk, I'm going to devote it to that and just kind of talk about it and kind of go over the episode and give some thoughts on it. And I may also just talk a little bit about, some of the recent developments with Star Trek, about this new movie they're going to do and how it looks like Kurtzman's era of Star Trek is over. And I'll probably do that instead of doing the next episode. And then let me see here. Let me look ahead. Okay, so next Tuesday will be August 4th. Um, okay, so I do need to let you know. So in a few weeks here, I'm going to be going on hiatus again because, as I've mentioned before, I'm in a master's program, and my classes are going to resume on August 24th. And at that point, I'm probably just not going to have time to do this. So I'll go on hiatus probably through November, and then come back at the end of December or beginning of December to resume the season. So next week, probably look at Axonar. And then the week after that, the 11th of August, would be the Empath. And then what's the episode after that? And then after that will be the Tholian Web. And I will probably stop there. And then again, resume in December with For the World is Hollow and I've Touched the Sky would probably be the first one I'll do. We'll see. Or actually, I take that back because there's going to be another Axonar movie fan film later this year. I don't know what the exact date is yet, but that's probably when I come back. I'll probably take a look at that if it's been out at that point. We'll see. Uh, what else? Oh, please do like the stream and do sub to the channel if you haven't already. I should be back next. I know. Hopefully, I'll be back next week to do Earth's Mightiest Mondays. I'm actually probably going to wind up taking a break from that too in a couple of weeks because I'm just not going to have time for that either. I'm going to be extremely busy. So I'll probably do that for the next couple of weeks, then bow out of that for a while as well. But I should be back next Monday for that. And yeah, and then do Axonar on Tuesday and take it from there. Again, thanks to everyone who tuned in for the stream and those who will catch it on a rewatch. And everyone have a nice evening, and I will see you all Monday, I guess. And why don't you all head over to J Man's channel? He's going to be doing that Wrestling with Horror that he does on Tuesdays, I believe. Taking a look at the back rooms, which I'm actually going to go over there to that stream when I'm done here. So hopefully I'll see you all over there. Wagner said, have you thought of pre-recording a few of these to show while you are unavailable? Yeah, I've thought about it. I kind of go back and forth, maybe. I'll consider it. We'll see. We'll see. And Rogues says, "Oh, you're gonna watch Axonar? Good. All right. Well, everyone, again, thanks for showing up, and hopefully I'll see you over at J Man's channel. And have a good night."